Good morning, everybody. We'll be coming on in. People that are watching the live stream, I think we've already started, so. This is a normal classroom. We could do the standard Church of Christ time of 9:10, but or 9:05, but we have to start off fairly promptly because there are people watching. We are picking up in Amos. Last week we kind of did a review of why study the prophets, why study the Old Testament, and we picked up a little bit of review of the first couple of chapters of Amos. And there were handouts, and I've got some if you want to catch up. We're going to do a very brief review of chapters 2, 3, and 4, actually 3 and 4 this morning, like about 30 seconds worth. And then we're going to go ahead and hit chapters 5 and 6 and see if we get into 7. But Amos, if you recall, is very little of the storyline in Amos. It's mostly about oracles or judgment pronunciations on different areas. And God making it very clear that he is not happy with the nation of Israel. They are very financially blessed, prosperous at this point in time, but they are taking, the rich are getting much richer, the poor are getting much poorer. There is no middle class in existence. We've got archaeology that bears that out. The opulence, the wealth that they had is expressed very clearly in the houses that they were building. Again, archaeology, we can see this. Building houses with ivory and gold inlays and just incredible. The money they were spending, but they were doing that on the backs of the poor. They were taking the poor and stealing from them through the legal court systems. They were oppressing them in every way they could think of and thought that was fine. And God said, you know, you have this worship that you're doing, and it's a very warped worship. It's a combination of 3 different religions, which we already talked about. But besides that, some of you are very sincere and you're very emphatic about the way you're worshiping, and you make sure you're there on Sunday morning for Bible study and for worship, and you're coming on Sunday night if there's a class, and you're here on Wednesday. You're here every time the doors are open, and you're doing everything you're supposed to do the right way. You're bringing all your animal sacrifices. You're doing all these things, and I hate it because you're following the letter of the law, not the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law is love your brothers and take care of the poor and needy, and you're doing the exact opposite. And I hate it, and I'm going to judge you for it. So, chapter 3, there were some questions that God has Amos ask, and you'll see this very, very frequently. Amos is probably the most sarcastic writer in the Bible. So I enjoy a little bit of Amos because I like what he does, but he really kind of takes it to the next level as far as most of the writers, and just jabs these people left and right with little insides that catch them unaware, and so that comes out all through the book. But in chapter 3, he has several questions that he asks that are about cause and effect. Well, we studied cause and effect, right, in school. So he's, you know, this causes this causes this. When you see this, it's caused by this. And these all make sense, right? These are things that everybody knows. So he goes through that, and then he says, okay, so here's the thing. You guys haven't done what you're supposed to. That's the cause. You know what the effect is going to be? If you don't change, you're going to have a judgment. And it's going to be not arbitrary. It's going to be standard. God says, I will punish sin that is unforgiven. You haven't even asked for forgiveness. You haven't done anything to get forgiveness. If you don't change that, there is going to be punishment for sin because it is sin and we can't allow it to go unpunished. The people were so morally warped that they couldn't tell right from wrong. Some general lessons: God is very concerned about how we treat others. God has a very long memory, because when he's pronouncing these judgments on the nations, including Israel, he's not saying, last week you did this. He's saying, 500 years ago, you did this. Kind of like your wife in an argument.
Yeah, I know that.
30 years ago on a Tuesday night, you said this. Pick. Sherry's rolling the eyes at me. My wife doesn't do that. Her memory's as bad as mine, so we don't have that problem. But he remembers details. He says, you did this and this and this, and I haven't forgotten it. And your punishment is coming. And it'll come when I say it's going to come. He has a long memory. God cares for the poor, the weak, the helpless. Another lesson is man's cruelty. It can be almost unbelievable, can't it? What you can do to your fellow man. And they've done experiments in Nazi Germany. I believe there were some experiments, not just the Holocaust, but other experiments on, and even since. In the United States, I remember my son watching, because he's a psychology major, watching a video about experiments they had done where people were put in charge of other people and pretty much left unattended. And the way they turn to just incredible cruelty very quickly is amazing. So man can be really, really mean to each other. The consequences of sin causes all kinds of problems, and not just for the sinner, right? It causes problems for other people. If you're out driving drunk, you are causing problems for other people. And it can have consequences centuries down the road. And there can be national consequences for sin, not just individual. In chapter 4, we see that the wives of the leaders were the power behind the scenes. They were the driving force. They were sitting there, and he says, you're sitting there and back on your couch, eating your bonbons, and telling your husband, you don't have enough stuff, go get you more by whatever means necessary. I want more excess, more luxury, so you go do this, and the husbands were doing it. And then, like I said, we're just kind of go through this very quickly, but in chapter 4, Amos kind of takes the stage apparently at a gathering, and he steps up in front of the podium, it appears, when the priest is supposed to be up there, and takes the priest's place, and launches into some sarcasm. He says, you guys think you're this? Nah, you're not. Go into your worship services, because that's what you like to do, so that you can rebel, because that's what you do. Go in here and do this, and sin, because that's what you do. But he's following the standard procedure, the standard format of what the priest's ritual would be. He's following the wording and then throwing in a slap in the face on the side of it. And so he goes through that. Go in Gilgal and multiply your rebellion. Perform all your pious religious acts. Make them known. Show off. Because that's what you love to do. You want to be seen by everybody as a super religious person. And you're not. Go through this pretty quick. So then he pronounces several judgments. He says, I've sent all these problems to you so that you would see. God said, I've done this for you. I've sent lack of rain. I've sent drought. I've sent bad harvests. I've sent all these things, fires, and plagues on you so that you would see that I'm trying to discipline you so that you would turn back to me. I've been doing this for the last several hundred years, and you haven't. And so you've had your chances, and we're about done. So some of the last lessons in chapter 4, God doesn't always intervene, or he doesn't intervene when we think he should, and he doesn't intervene in the way we think he should, but he always does whatever he thinks is right, which is what is right, and he does it at the right time, and he does it in the right way. Whether we think so or not doesn't really matter. When God does it, it's right. God wants relationship with each of us individually, and he wants relationship with us as a group. He wants to be Ken's friend, but he wants to be the friend of the Somerville Church, and he wants to be the friend of the United States. If the individual or group will turn to him and reach for him. He is there for us. He gives guidance positively, sometimes negatively. He's patient, but his patience has limits, and judgment is going to happen. And that brings us up to chapter 5. So chapter 5 starts out with Lynn's favorite thing. Lynn had the men's day on a lament from Lamentations, but he starts out with a lament, which is a song of mourning, right? Anybody tell me more about what a lament is? It's a song of mourning, yes. For what reason?
Typically for sin.
Or,
Typically for sin.
Typically for sin, or mourning the death of a relative or a friend or a national hero, something like that. And Lamentations is about, the book of Lamentations is definitely about sin. So he takes up a song of mourning for Israel. And because they've fallen, right? Verse 2, and he doesn't, have they fallen yet? No, they're still right there full of pride, all this money going around, and he's talking about them as having fallen already in the past tense. Because, and their desolation is going to be complete, and they are going to be completely unnoticed. Verse 2 is really telling, 5:2, she has fallen, she will not rise again, the virgin Israel. She lies unnoticed on her land, there is no one to raise her up. That's pretty rough, isn't it? You're not only going to die, you're going to die in the land, and nobody's even going to be there to bury you. You're going to be completely unnoticed, the desolation is complete, the destruction is complete. Verse 3 talks about the totality of this destruction. There's going to be, according to him, 10% left. A city that sends 1,000 people out to fight in a battle is going to come back with 100. Pretty rough, right? But verse 4, and we've talked about this repeatedly, there's still an opportunity for hope at this point. Verse 4 says, God says, seek me so that you may live. God wouldn't say that if he didn't mean it, would he? So even though I'm already pronouncing this judgment on you, I'm still giving you the opportunity to turn it around and live. But he says, verse 5, don't rely on your, and cultic here doesn't necessarily mean a Christian type cult. It means an organized worship. So don't rely on your organized worship assemblies, on your temples, on everything that you're doing that makes you think you're so righteous. Don't rely on any of that, because that's the reason God's going to cause this judgment. Verse 6, he says there's two alternatives still. Seek me and seek God so that you can live. And if you don't, what's going to happen? He's going to break through like a fire. Fire usually is a military pronunciation, right? But if you seek God, you can still live. Fire is a judgment representing the captivity. And he says this is for those that turn justice into wormwood and throw righteousness to the earth. So they were taking justice, which is fair and impartial administration of the law and everything else, and they were just perverting it to their own ends for whatever they wanted. He says, I'm just hammering this home time and time again, this is what I'm so upset about. And he actually is more upset about that than he is about, it appears, than he is about the false worship. And we know the worship is really weird. They've got calves that they're worshiping again still, and Baal is still there. And he's more concerned about the way they're treating the poor than he is. He spends more time talking about that than he does about the worship. Those verses right here talk about the law requiring the concern. Jeremiah 5 says that justice is defending the rights of the poor. So this is what he wants, right? And you have had a complete disregard. Wormwood is bitterness. Verse 8 is part of a hymn that was fairly popular at the time, and it's the same hymn as we had in chapter 4, verse 13. just a different part of it is what it appears, but it talks about God's sovereignty in the sequence in nature. So you've got God forming the constellations, right? What else does he do? He changes the darkness into morning. He's creating the sun and moon, and he's also making the day and night. Calls from the waters of the sea. Calling for the waters of the sea is where he, in creation, put the water where it belonged, the land where it belongs, set a border so that it would not go past this. This is who we're talking about, the one that did all of that, right? And then he says in verse 9, God's sovereignty in human history. It's he that makes destruction flash upon the strong. It doesn't matter how strong the army is, God is stronger. And so, we talked about at different times, one night, one angel went and destroyed an army of 200,000 people. And Jesus could have called 72,000 of those angels as a not even literal number, but one angel does 200,000 and Jesus could call 72,000 of them. Lynn?
I was just going to say, as you were going over the end of chapter 4, he gave those two examples of Egypt and Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right.
And now as you're reading through this, I'm thinking the judgment that he put on them, but also the chances that they had.
Oh, yeah.
That they were given opportunities to do what God asked, to turn from their ways. But ultimately, and so they've got these two examples, and now here he's talking about, I can do this.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not beyond me. You've seen me do it before.
Exactly. Yeah, you've seen it because so Egypt. We destroyed the entire Egyptian army in the sea. I did that. God did that while you watched. You should have been telling your kids about this. Before we left Egypt, you saw that 10 plagues, right? Let my people go or I'm going to do this. Let my people go or I'm going to do this. And so God is giving even non-believers, not his people, many chances to turn and to seek him and recognize him. Sodom and Gomorrah had their chances, Kevin?
This is why back, like Lynn was saying, back in chapter 4, verse 12, I would have raised an eyebrow then, because he says, therefore this is what I will do to you, Israel, because I will do this to you, Israel, prepare to meet your God.
That's a scary statement, isn't it?
So, if God is telling me that, prepare to meet your Maker, that you would have thought that would raise some eyebrows, because they had already seen the power of God and what he could do.
Yeah. I mean, and if you go back through the judges and all the deliverance times of that and the kings before this, and times when God wiped out entire armies while they were sleeping, they've got a history. They know their history. They know what God has done to armies and nations much more powerful than they are right now. And they're just not listening.
That's just human nature. I mean, you think about it. I, for one, have had more than one traffic ticket.
No.
The punishment, what it cost me, but it doesn't take long before it's all forgotten, because I got to get up where I'm going, and and the 3 is the same thing.
Oh yeah. Yep. So verse 10 now, so talk about God in nature, God in military history or human history. Verse 10, what happens in the city gates? What goes on at the city gates in this time?
Usually the elders sit there and meet.
The elders sit there and meet, and that's where they have their legal proceedings. Quite often, the trials are right there at the city gates. So that's why it says, the one that rebukes in the gate, the one that's at the gate calling out the evil people, is hated by the people. And the one that speaks with integrity, one of the wise men that's still honest, is despised in the courts, at the city gate, by the community for telling the truth and for standing up for what's right. You won't even listen to people say what the truth is. Now, one of the reasons, and I'm not going to call this out every time we hit one of these, but one of the reasons we study the Old Testament and the prophets and anything else is not just that we learn the history, right? Though, we've got the saying that those who don't know their history are destined to repeat it. Happens, right? But there's another saying that it's better to learn from somebody else's experiences than your own. You know, if you can learn from somebody else's, you don't have to waste the time learning those lessons yourself. Learn from somebody else's mistakes or successes. So if we see what they did, we can avoid some of these same mistakes. But do you see the culture acting kind of this way right now? You can't say what's right without being attacked for it.
This may be off a little bit, but for the minor prophets specifically, and Amos would be a good example, just like Jeremiah was.
Right.
That because in the day they also had false prophets,
Mm-hmm.
how did God's chosen people determine which ones were the false prophets if it wasn't so obvious? Like with the major prophets, you understand that they were doing things that were coming true right then.
Mm-hmm.
But with people like Amos that were making predictions that didn't necessarily happen right then, how did the Israelites determine that they were actually of God rather than a false prophet?
Okay. So the question, if you couldn't hear, and I think she spoke loud enough, but is when a prophet spoke, but what they were speaking as far as predictions didn't come true right away, how did the people know that they were from God versus not from God? And so the standard answer is, well, the predictions come true, and Amos's do, but Amos probably only prophesied for a year, and we don't know exactly when the destruction came, but it wasn't until Amos was gone back to Judah, most likely. So what are other ways you can tell that the prophet is from God? Anybody want to jump on that one?
If these prophets come true.
If they come true, if what they're saying is in line with what you already know about God versus not in line. So Amaziah, for instance, when we get to chapter 7, the priest there at Bethel is a priest of the religion that Israel has put together. If you take that and you compare that to the law, there's major conflict. If you take what Amos is saying, which is drawing strictly from Israelite history and pronouncing judgments based on the promises from Exodus and Leviticus, if you follow me, if you do these things, I will bless you. If you don't do these things, I will curse you. And I'm saying that you're not following what God said, and you can go back and pull up Exodus chapter 20, a little sarcasm there, and read what God said, and you can look at what you're doing and see that they're not in line, then you can tell that what I'm saying is true. And I'm the true prophet, and Amaziah is not. Glenn?
I know what you're saying there. I think the problem that we're seeing here is they don't know the word.
They don't.
They
Right.
don't know the word. So how can I compare, if I don't know the truth, how can I compare what I'm hearing to what I don't know in the first place, right? I think the other thing you're asking, how do you know a true prophet? Most of the leaders were wanting to hear what they wanted to hear.
Exactly.
And so the false prophets were the ones who were giving them what they wanted to hear, right? And so, a good leader understands, I don't need people who are just going to parrot what I say and tell me what I want to hear. I need people who are willing to stand up and say what they think, even if they're wrong sometimes.
Right.
Right? And so those leaders were happy to hear what they wanted to hear, and so they gathered those men among them.
And so you've got scriptures, one second, Old Testament and New Testament, that talk about there are times when there will be times come when people want to have their ears tickled. They want to be told exactly what they want to hear, and they don't want to hear the truth. And when you have gotten out of the Word, and you are not studying it to see what it does say, then how are you going to know when you're being told the truth and a lie? So we're back to our daily Bible study. Let's go with Jack, then Kevin, then Brian.
It's really that, what Lynn's saying, human beings have never changed. We're the same.
Right.
And today, you see the same thing. We got lots of false prophets around, and a lot of them on television. But I think of Bill was always bringing up those from Berea. Even, they didn't even trust what Paul said. They searched the scriptures to see if it was so. And I think the difference between, or what helps you find the false prophet or not is a true desire to find the truth.
Yeah.
You know, do you want to hear what you already believe and support that, or do you really have a desire to find the truth? Because the Holy Spirit, it says, will guide you into all truths. Well, that was true back then too. You know, if you truly want to find the truth, the Holy Spirit will lead you if you let Him lead you.
Okay. Kevin?
I was just thinking here, the scripture says here, there are those who oppose the innocent and take bribes, and deprive the poor of justice in the courts. Therefore, the prudent keep quiet in such times, for the times are evil. And what that brought to me was what happened to that Kansas City Chiefs kicker this weekend, or just a couple of days ago, in a commencement speech that he gave at a women's college for women. And he talked about the virtues of womanhood and what their greatest gift would be to be a wife, a mother, and the virtues of that, and what it meant to be a manly man, what it meant to be a masculine man. And he got a standing ovation from that at the college. But the fire he took from the public
Oh, yeah.
was unimaginable. I mean, he took hits from all over for speaking the truth, for speaking what he felt. And, you know, we're in trouble when the time comes where you cannot speak the truth, where you cannot speak how you feel without coming under such condemnation as he did.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what was going on here.
Going on here, going on here, right?
Yeah.
Because what he spoke, and I didn't hear all the speech, I heard about it and heard snippets. He's Catholic, invited to a Catholic college for their graduation ceremony, and gets up and talks about core Christian beliefs, and the world is just going
He
nuts.
set the world on fire.
Why can you say, you can't say stuff like that?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I thought there was this thing called freedom of speech in our country, but anyway, Brian.
Yeah, along the same lines, you know, I think what he's doing here, he's trying to appeal to their conscience. And so they have to deliberately go against their conscience to disregard his warnings.
Yes, okay.
And the same thing that's going on here. There is obviously right and wrong.
Oh, yeah.
You have to make a mental effort to put what you know is right aside.
Yeah. Deep down, even though you're not in the Word, you know when you are torturing people and stealing from people, it's not right.
The other thing is there was history of this with prophets in recent history. Ahab and the Micaiah prophet, who basically told them, all these people are tickling your ears, telling you what you want to hear,
Yeah,
but you shouldn't go out there and fight because you're not going to win.
Right.
They put him in jail.
yeah,
But that was recent history for them.
For them,
And
yes.
it's kind of true.
yeah.
Even though at the time, there was no, you know, he got put in jail because, it's like, you know, what are all these other prophets are telling me, it's great, it's fine, let's go.
So verse 11, we get to therefore, David Clayton's favorite word, right? Oh, sorry. I'm looking at my paper and not giving you all something. When you see the word therefore, what's it mean? Why is it there? It's therefore because it's pointing back to the other stuff, right? Because of all that, therefore, that all that is there, calamity has not been introduced in detail, but it is going to come. And so, though you build houses of cut stone, you're not going to live in them. Though you built these beautiful planted, beautiful vineyards, you're not going to drink the wine. I know your offenses are many. You're hostile to the righteous. You accept bribes. You turn the poor away from the justice at the gate. And then verse 13, Kevin mentioned, therefore at such a time the prudent person is going to keep quiet because it doesn't do any good to stand up for what's right because nobody is going to listen. That's how bad it was. And you can bring that up today if you want to. So verse 14, what's he do? He says, but guess what? There's still an opportunity. I'm still giving you another opportunity. Seek good and not evil so that you may live and so that God will be with you as you think He already is. You think God's with you because you're doing all these pious things, but you're not seeking good. So seek good and not evil so that you may live, because you're going to die if you don't. Hate, and then verse 15, he builds on that, and he says, not only should you seek good, not evil, now you need to hate evil and love good. So building up, right? Establish justice. Justice is important to treat people right. Perhaps, so again, still there's the opportunity, but now it's perhaps, maybe. So you're getting closer and closer to the judgment. The chances of you getting this are less, but it's perhaps God will be gracious to the remnant. Okay? Sir? Yep.
This just goes to show you over and over and over and over and over again, just how patient our God is with us. I mean, he didn't have to get that many opportunities.
Oh, no.
He could have given one, maybe two, and then said the heck with it.
Right.
But he didn't. He gives opportunity after opportunity after opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, even to us today.
Yes.
He gives us opportunity. And so, it frustrates me when I talk to people and they say, well, I've done this, I've done that, I'm just not good at it. What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
All you got to do is just turn
Yes.
and accept Jesus, and you're going to be forgiven no matter what you've done.
Yeah.
Because these people were about as evil as you could get.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And God kept telling them, turn, 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 love one another, accept this and accept that, and you're going to live. That's a great message for us today. Now, that's a great message for us.
And you will hear me say this quite often. You hear people talk about, well, God acted different in the Old Testament than the New Testament. The Old Testament is all about judgment. The New Testament is about grace. God offered grace all through the Old Testament.
That's right.
But he also did the punishment for those who didn't accept the grace. The New Testament, we're being offered the grace. The punishment is still to come. But these were punished already. That's the only difference, is he offered grace and then he punished. New Testament, he's offered the grace. The punishment is coming. All right. So verse 16, 17, God already knows what the answer is going to be. They're not going to return. They're not going to repent. So, therefore, there is going to be mourning in all the public squares. As I pass through you, all the paid mourners are going to be mourning, all the farmers, everybody is going to be mourning, because I'm going to do the judgment, because I already know you're not going to come through. And this verse 18 brought me back to Romans chapters 1 and 2 when we did Romans. Yes, dear. Thank you. Romans 1. We talked about this. Romans 1, Paul is writing to Jews in Rome, and he's saying, you guys are looking for the judgment of God on all these evil people around you. Guess what? You're doing this. And in Romans 1 and 2, he lists all the sins of the culture around them, and they're as bad as anything we're seeing here in Amos, and they're as bad as anything we're seeing today. And he says, and you're pronouncing judgment, waiting on God to come punish all these other people, and you're doing the exact same things. Do you think you're going to escape the judgment just because you're a Jew? You're not going to escape the judgment because you're doing the same things. So these people think they're waiting on the day of judgment for God to come and punish all these people around them, and they're doing the exact same things. And so Amos is calling that out to their attention. Similar level of sin, similar belief God is still on the side of the Jews, similar judgment to come. One of the common theological end-time beliefs of the time was that God was going to punish everybody but the Jews. So, and they were still believing that first century when Paul's writing to the Romans. They thought that God would come and judge the sin of others, but they were exempt. So verse 19 and 20, he comes up with a couple of metaphors to show them not so. A man runs away from a lion, right? Gets away from the lion. Stop, catch your breath. I'm around the corner, catch my breath, look up, bear. You walk in your house, all the danger outside, everything's good. Put your hand against the wall, catch your breath, snake. You think you're safe, you're not. I can punish you wherever you are. and will if you don't turn, right? So flee lion, the time of judgment is going to be a time of judgment for everybody, not just for those other people. And then verse 21 to 24, he breaks down everything that they're doing in their religion one piece at a time and tells them why he's not happy with it. I reject your festivals. So he's just got done. So remember, he's on stage where the priest is supposed to be, making fun of what they're doing with their religious beliefs and with their religious practices and their end-time beliefs. And now their end-time beliefs, and now he jumps right into, and your religious practices and all your ceremonies, they're a waste of time too. And so these people are saying, what? But he uses the same word hate in verse 21 that he used back in verse 15 for saying hate evil. God is saying, I hate your worship. The same extent that I want you to hate evil. Every aspect was an aspect of disobedience because they ignored the heart of the law. Now it appears that they took their worship very seriously. They were bringing animal sacrifices like they were supposed to. They were showing up on time. They were spending all this money. They were there for the entire worship, and they sang their hearts out, and just everything was great, right? Walked out of that worship. Oh, that was a great service today, wasn't it? I just felt so uplifted. Everybody been there and not necessarily true? All right. But they felt really good about themselves because the worship was so good. And God said, I hate it. I'm not even listening to your songs anymore. Don't want anything to do with them. So he takes up each element. The festivals were the three big feasts that they would pilgrimage. They would travel to Jerusalem, unleavened bread, weeks, or booths, and harvest. And God says that you're not doing those right. And then your festive assemblies were holidays for celebration, and you're not doing those right. Burnt offerings, where the entire animal is burned up on the altar, and your psalm service is nothing but noise. So every aspect of your worship is a complete waste of time, and I'm rejecting all of it.
That kind of goes back to your first comment, is how they were treating people relative to how they're worshiping. All those things that he asked them to do, they're doing. All the festivals and things like that. But what it lacks is any coming out of the heart. The thing that the way they treated people so overshadowed, and you sort of said this to me, so overshadowed any worship they have. The worship, so you ask him to do it. Later you'll see where he says, you should have been doing those things.
Right.
But you need justice because you didn't understand, it wasn't even a heart issue whatsoever.
Right.
You just did it for whatever reason. Maybe your tradition, maybe. But I mean, the first piece is how you approach people around you. That told me whether your heart was in my area.
And this question may be a little bit harder to catch the answer to. They were offering burnt offerings, right? They were offering grain offerings. They were offering peace offerings. What's missing?
Fellowship.
Fellowship? Sin offerings. They weren't offering sacrifices for their sins. Why not? Because they didn't think they were sinning. Or they didn't want to think about whether they were sinning or not. If you don't acknowledge your sin, you can't repent of your sin. You can't turn from it if you haven't acknowledged it. They weren't offering them. Okay. So verse 24, we've all heard it, right? But let justice roll out like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. I had a hard time before wondering how this verse fit in. But I read enough this week, I got it. How does it tie into those previous verses? You guys are smarter than me.
That's the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
Justice and righteousness.
So you should be doing those things and not leaving the others. Jesus said, you should be doing all those offerings, but not leaving out the other stuff, right? That's what, 24 starts with the word but. This is what you're leaving out. And this is the most important part. You're not doing justice. So let justice roll out like waters. and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. And if you did that, then things would be so much better. So that's the way to get God's approval. Does that paint a picture, verse 24, of how they should and how we should act? How should we let our justice be?
Sounds constant.
Constant. Like a spring flood. Let it roll out like waters, like the spring flood. Let it come up high. And then let your righteousness stay steady all year long, like a stream that never dries up. So this is not just a hit and miss, or do it once in a while. This is how your life should be. And when you do that, then things are going to be all right. And then verse 25 to 27. Did you present me with sacrifices, grain offerings in the wilderness for 40 years? And the assumed answer for us would be, well, yeah. And their answer was, yeah. But it wasn't a complete yeah, was it? Because what were you also doing? You carried along Sikkuth, your king, and Kion, your images, the star of your gods, which you made for yourselves. These may have come all the way from Egypt with them. They snuck them in. We know they had some things come from Egypt, right? Therefore, I'm going to make you go into exile. So what is going on here? Apparently, obedience to the law had started diminishing very quickly, like during the 40 years. During the 40 years, there was no circumcision going on. Joshua had to fix that after they got into the promised land. So everybody 0 to 40 had to get circumcised at the same time because they didn't practice it for 40 years. There are several other things. Ezekiel and Hosea talk about the fact that there were all these other gods being snuck in and worshipped and praised. And then you have to have, and so it snuck in from Egypt and from the neighboring countries as they were go on. Which leads to the question, what were they thinking? The old country song, what was I thinking? So you're sitting here worshiping who? Sikkuth. Who's he? Probably not pronouncing it. He is the Assyrian, which is interesting, god of war, identified with the planet Saturn. So Amos is saying, you are worshiping the god of the planet Saturn. What did I say back here just a few verses earlier? The real God, the one that you say you're worshiping, is the one that created Saturn, along with all the other planets and all the other stars and everything else. Why are you worshiping this? Is this even close to remotely intelligent people? And the same thing, you're worshiping a star instead of a star, the God that created all the stars. Go back to verse 8, look at it, reminding you. And these are images that you made with your own hands. Really? You had to make the image to be able to worship it instead of the God that made you. So we'll give you a couple of verses you can look up. But the gods of Assyria, somebody made this point, were occupying the hearts of Israel long before the army from Assyria ever occupied the land. That's interesting, isn't it? But if you want to get some, so Isaiah 44, 9 to 19 talks about the foolishness of idolatry. You're making, if you've got the money, you make a god out of gold. If not, you make one out of silver. If you're poor, you make one out of wood. But half the wood you use for a fire to bake bread, and the other half you're made into an image that you can worship and say, you're my God. Really? And the thing is, like Jack said, we're no different. Are we? We do the same thing sometimes. All right. And then there's another Psalm, 115, 4 to 8 also talks about that same stuff. Why are you worshiping these things that you may have made, or God made along with you, when you should be worshiping the God that made you? Pay attention to what you spend your time and money and thoughts on, because that's what you're worshiping. So verse 24, he calls for obedience. And verse 25 and 26, he affirms a long history of disobedience. And verse 27, judgment is going to come. And he says it's going to come from beyond Damascus. So if you're in Israel and you look at Damascus and it's beyond that, guess what's up there? Assyria. He hasn't named it yet, but he's letting him know where it's coming from. God's got everything already in place long before they get to that point. Chapter 5 was a lot more than chapter 6. Chapter 6 we'll hit for just a couple minutes. Again, sarcasm, right? Woe to those who are carefree in Zion and to those who feel secure on the mountain of Samaria, the dignitaries of the foremost of nations. You guys, the officers of Israel, think you guys are the most important people of the most important country around you. Go look at these other countries and these other cities, city kingdoms, and you do, and you're bragging about it. Go to these other, Calneh and Hamath and Gath. These are the other big cities, and you're coming back saying, yeah, we're better than all of them. Well, Gath was already probably underneath control of somebody else. But the others were going to be. And you're not any bigger than them, and you're no more important than them, but you just think you are. So here's the sarcasm. And then he says, you're unwilling to, verses 3 to 6, you're unwilling to hear about the judgment. Your ears are completely closed. Your ears are completely closed. You will accept nothing about that. You're boasting about your national security, your national power, your military might. We're so strong. You know, we've done this and we've done this, and we're stronger than everybody around. And what does your history show you about those strong armies? They don't matter when you're facing God, do they? You don't want to hear about the judgment. Verses 4 to 6, he describes the opulence and the oppression. And verse 7, because of all your evil and the way you're treating all these other people, you will be the first ones to go into exile. Huh? Exile. Yeah. Okay. What has been the cause of it? Pride. Again, lesson for today, right? Doesn't take long for pride to sneak in. Verse 9, the extent of the punishment. And then if there are 10 people left in a house, they're all going to die. Verse 10 could be a contagious plague, but then when somebody that's a relative comes in to clean up and haul the bodies out and says, is there anybody left? And whoever's there says, no. He says, shh, don't even say the word of the cause of this. The cause of this is God. God brought, don't even say it out loud because we might instigate him to fire up the punishment and kill whatever's left. So just keep your mouth shut and leave it alone, right? Because we don't want him restarting it. Verse 11, the punishment's going to be on everybody. Verse 12 is kind of weird. Different versions of the Bible have very different sayings on some of this. But basically, can you run a horse, take a horse, and run it up a rocky cliff? Or through a boulder-strewn pasture? Whichever way you interpret it, it's pretty much the same thing. Horses don't run through that, do they? Okay. And then, can you plow in that same rocky field where the boulders are like this? No, you can't, right? One of the versions says, can you plow in the ocean? Okay. That doesn't work too well either, does it? It sinks. These are very absurd metaphors. And he says, but guess what? That's what you're doing with your justice. You're just as absurd the way you're handling your justice. And then verse 13 and 14, and we'll finish chapter 6. Lodabar and Karnaim, you say, you know, we recently captured them. We're strong. We're military. Our military is strong, right? Amos, with the sarcasm, pronounces Lodabar, which is probably a town called Debir, D-E-B-I-R, but they are pronouncing Lodabar. You get different spellings all through, right? The way Amos pronounces the word means nothing. We captured Lodabar. And Amos says, yeah, you captured nothing. And Karnaim is the word for strength. He says, you're relying on your strength, and your strength isn't going to get it either. You're bragging about your strength and wealth. And remember who this is. The Lord, the God of armies, is going to bring a nation that is going to oppress you from your northern border to your southern border. And you are not going to be able to stop them with all your imagined strength. All right, so 5 and 6, 7, 8, and 9, we'll shoot for